WCW by late 1996 was making the WWF look like a second-rate wrestling promotion. The perception was that the big boys played in WCW. Everyone was jumping over to Ted Turner's promotion, and us, as fans, were under the impression that if the big names were going to WCW, then World Championship Wrestling was the place to be. The New World Order were on fire, things felt unpredictable, it was a great time to be a wrestling fan. As we all know, Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, who worked in the WWF as Razor Ramon and Diesel respectively, had went to WCW and kick-started the NWO era. When Scott and Kevin first got to WCW though, they were pretty much portraying the characters they played in the WWF. Most notably, Scott had the toothpick, he had the accent, he was Razor Ramon without calling himself Razor Ramon. The WWF took offence to this and tried to sue WCW for using the likeness of WWF superstars on their show. In the legal papers submitted by WWF, they not only claimed ownership of the names and basic characters, but they claimed ownership of absolutely everything, right down to the characters' hairstyles. This forced Kevin and Scott to admit that they were not working for the WWF and had no ties with the company, even though their entrance into WCW was based on them being invaders from the WWF. Vince McMahon felt, as silly as it sounds, that people weren't paying to see Kevin Nash and Scott Hall, but rather people paid to see Diesel and Razor Ramon, the characters that he created. More so, Vince McMahon was all about proving a point, that the characters were only famous because he made them so. It's insane to think that Vince McMahon believed other people could simply take on the Razor and Diesel gimmicks, but this is exactly what happened. Two other men, not Scott Hall and not Kevin Nash, would become Razor Ramon and Big Daddy Cool Diesel. So think about it in today's perspective. Could you imagine someone else coming out and saying that they are the new Finn Balor? Taking on the gimmick, the name, the accent? How about the new Bray Wyatt? It sounds so ridiculous, but back in 1996, Vince was trying to prove this point, that those guys who left to go to WCW were replaceable. All it done was hurt the WWF even more. Beginning in September 1996, Jim Ross would begin teasing the return of Razor Ramon and Diesel. Ross was portraying a heel character of sorts during this period. He was getting fed up of his colleagues not taking him seriously, and he was also angry about getting fired previously, so he was all about sticking it to Vince McMahon and proving him wrong, in character anyway. The teasing would build over the next few weeks, but fans still weren't tuning into Raw. WCW actually got wind of this so-called return of Diesel and Razor, and they got totally worked. So worked were WCW that they thought it was all legitimate, and they offered Hall and Nash even bigger contracts to stay in WCW. Both Kevin and Scott knew they weren't going to the WWF, but they played WCW and gladly accepted more money. In a roundabout way, the WWF's desire to bury Hall and Nash only helped the men's finances. Wrestling can be funny sometimes. On the September 23rd, 1996 edition of Monday Night Raw, a young man named Rick Bogner walked through the curtains looking more like an adult wearing a Halloween costume than a believable version of Razor Ramon. Within seconds of Rick's entrance, the whole idea was dead in the water. It was more like a slap in the face to fans, some of which I'm sure actually believed that Razor Ramon would be on Monday Night Raw. It was already a totally botched attempt by Vince McMahon to stick it to WCW, and the fans were the ones who paid for it. Bogner had been in professional wrestling since 1988, mainly working in Japan's frontier martial arts wrestling. He had also worked in Wrestle and Romance and also in ECW. Vince McMahon apparently found out he could do a decent Razor Ramon accent, and he offered him a job based on this fact. Rick Bogner said of his debut as Razor Ramon, "Maybe if they hadn't lied or hinted that the originals were coming back, but said they had someone new, or that we do own the trademarks and the copyrights and the costumes and the name, but we're putting it on a younger guy who is bigger and stronger and just had me be a nasty heel, then it might have worked. Chances are probably not, but it might have." Diesel came back the week after, portrayed by Glenn Jacobs, who, as we know, would find greater success in the WWE as Kane. Jacobs had already had a good bit of WWE experience when he worked as Jerry Lawler's personal dentist, Isaac Yankem, but, as expected, his debut as the fake Diesel fell totally flat. It just pissed a lot of fans off. What should be mentioned here is that Jim Ross was kind of being made the scapegoat in all this. His heel character was on commentary saying that this indeed was Razor and Diesel, even when his colleagues were calling him out. Jim Ross was made to look like the fool in all of this, but as we know, it was all Vince McMahon's idea, a totally crazy idea. Bruce Pritchard, a producer for the WWE at the time, said of the fake Razor and Diesel's characters, "Hindsight is 20/20. You can look at it and go, boy, that sucked, but at the time, legally you have something to prove. You own the trademarks, you own names, you own the character likeness, you created it. We created Razor and Diesel, they didn't. We owned it and we put the investment into those characters, and now they're capitalising on that investment that we put in. It's just more of you had to set an example, you had to set a precedent that you owned it. It wasn't necessarily the person portraying the character, as it was the character that got over." Still to this day, I struggle to see what upside this idea had. Fans would see the fake Diesel and Razor and think, well, fuck this. If I want to see the real Diesel and Razor, I'll change the channel and watch Nitro. Having fake versions of two of your previously biggest superstars done nothing but make the WWF look second rate in comparison to WCW. Vince McMahon's stubborn ways not only made his company look second rate, but it also killed a lot of goodwill between the WWF and its fanbase for sure. Needless to say, the WWF didn't gain any viewership traction with the reintroduction of Diesel and Razor. Hall and Nash, meanwhile, benefited greatly. The fact that the World Wrestling Federation could create fake versions of their characters only made the real versions look like more desirable superstars. As mentioned, Hall and Nash got a nice contract upgrade when WCW was worked into believing they were returning to the WWF. Scott Hall even contacted Rick Bogner and asked if he wanted to buy some of his old Razor Ramon ring gear. No joke, he actually done this. Though the characters failed from the get-go, WWE continued to use them for the better part of 5 months, allowing the characters to continue into early 1997. Soon though, the WWF caught a grip, and Rick Bogner and Glenn Jacobs were relegated to the USWA, where the men had a loser leaves town match. The fake Razor defeated the fake Diesel in this match. The WWE would then sweep the whole experiment under the rug as if nothing happened. Glenn Jacobs would return to the company later in the year as Kane, and the rest is history. But what about Rick Bogner? According to Rick, when he asked Vince McMahon about his contract, McMahon simply replied, "Rick, please don't call me at this number again." From there, Bogner would go back to Japan, competing as the Free Spirit Rick Titan, and he also returned to his original character Big Titan, who oddly enough was a member of New Japan's NWO Japan faction. You couldn't make it up. Rick also overcame a dependency on pain medication, and now he works as a motivational speaker. Vince McMahon and the WWE were wise enough to never really try this kind of thing again, noticing that it done way more harm than good. The only other example I can think of is Sin Cara, who was originally played by Mystico, but it's very different when the character is under a mask. We should also think of Rick Bogner here too. While Glenn Jacobs was kept safe and went on to bigger and better things, Rick wasn't so fortunate. It was Rick who said that Vince McMahon told him to never call him again, which must have been a real tough thing to hear. Imagine dreaming of becoming a WWF superstar, only to get used as a bootleg version of a past superstar. Of course, Rick could have said no, but this would have been the kiss of death for any future chances he may have had with the company. The fake Diesel and the fake Razor Ramon idea, in my opinion, was one of the very worst ideas Vince McMahon ever had. Thankfully, it seems it was also something he learned a lesson from.